After more than 5 years working in e-commerce, I've seen teams obsessing with things like the color of the CTAs, homepage refreshes, or the launch of a GWP, while ignoring the decisions that actually shape the entire business: product, price, placement, promotion. You've probably already heard of this. They are the 4 Ps of the marketing mix. But this is not going to be a classic and generic textbook version of the 4 Ps. Hi, my name is Paolo, and in this video I'm applying the 4P frameworks specifically to e-commerce, focusing on the 4 main decisions that actually drive performance whenever you're selling products online. And for each of the 4P, product, price, placement, and promotion, I will provide a very useful and hands-on framework that you can use to understand what is working, what's holding you back, and in general to build a stronger e-commerce brand strategy. So let's begin. Let's start with the most important one: product. When you build a house, you always start with the foundation. And in this case, the foundation is product market fit. A strong product doesn't begin with what you want to sell. It begins with understanding who your customers are. What do they need? What the problem are you going to solve for them? And what are they already looking for? So basically, demand comes first, product comes second. So your role is to identify that demand and build an offer that matches the expectations of your customers in a way that is just better than the alternatives that they have. It means, yes, choosing the right product, but it also means choosing the right features, the right quality, the right positioning, and the right price for that specific target customer. Once that foundation is clear, you can move on to the next step, which is assortment. If you're just starting out in e-commerce, well, you may want to start with one single product. But as your catalog grows, every item needs a clear role within your assortment. And to organize and better structure your products within your portfolio, I would strongly recommend to use a framework that is inspired by the BCG metrics and then specifically adapted for e-commerce. Let's pick an industry, let's say the fashion industry, and apply the BCG metrics to a potential product portfolio of a fashion brand. So the logic is very simple. Every product in your portfolio has a role, and that role depends on 2 elements: the market share and the growth potential. The market share sits on the x-axis while the growth potential sits on the y-axis. So let's start with the first quadrant: low market share, low growth potential. And in there we have outlet products and carryovers. Let's start with outlet products, which are those products that typically carry the highest markdowns because their primary role is to clear the excess inventory and free up space for new products. Then in the same bucket, we have carryovers, which are your evergreen products. They're not tied to a specific season and should remain consistently available throughout the year because customers know them, trust them, and continue to buy them. Moving to the right, we have cash cow. So high market share, but low growth potential. These are your most reliable volume drivers, the cash cow. They generate a large share of sales, and because demand is already strong, they also may be the least discounted products in the assortment. Moving to the top right, so high market share and high growth potential, we have hero products. So these are the products that drive your brand differentiation and elevates you from competitors. They create desire, they inspire customers, and they are often the items that best represent what the brand stands for. And finally, in the top left corner, so low market share but very high growth potential, we have new product launches. These include capsule collections, new product introductions, and brand collaborations that have not yet fully been validated by the market and by the customers. They often come with limited stock and high uncertainty. Demand can be extremely strong or it can remain very low. So bear in mind, the point isn't to just launch products, is to understand what's the role of each product within the assortment, within the portfolio. And to do that, you can use this framework that I have just provided you. But I haven't finished covering all the topics regarding the product. I also want to say a few words about packaging, which in e-commerce is extremely relevant, and I consider it conceptually as part of your product. In fact, since you are shipping to the customer's house, well, the package in which your product comes in is also part of the experience that customers feel when interacting with your brand and purchasing from you. Think of the unboxing content that today most influencers do. So keep that in mind when you're choosing your package and your warehouse handling partner. Then I also want to briefly discuss the PDP, the product detail page. Every image, every video that goes in there should be curated obsessively. The product detail page is extremely important. It's the digital representation of your product and the only thing that customer sees of your product before it reaches their home. So make sure to spend energies, time, and resources to curate the PDP, especially because in 2026 you've got plenty of AI tools that can support you to optimize it. You will be rewarded. And finally, stock and inventory management. When talking about products, this is chronically underestimated, and it's one of the single biggest missed opportunities in e-commerce. Picture this: a customer is browsing on your website, goes into a PDP of a product that he likes, but what the size isn't available or the color isn't available. So that means that you're missing out on a potential sale that was already there. A high intent customer in the point of sale exactly where he was supposed to be. And if that happens to you too, well, you're missing out on a huge opportunity, especially if that product is a cash cow with no discount or at full price. So my strongest recommendations when it comes to product inventory is to closely monitor KPIs such as sell-through rate, weeks of supply, inventory turnover, and forecast accuracy. Tracking these metrics will help you align inventory with demand. So basically what you have and what you're supposed to have to fulfill the requests and the expectations of customers. By doing that, you will capture every potential sales opportunity and ensure that customers find the products that they're looking for when they're ready to buy. So this was all in short about the product, the first one of the 4 P's: product, price, placement, and promotion. Let's now move on to price. So pricing is probably one of the most complex and misunderstood concepts within the 4 P's. And just for you today, I've created a simple framework to conceive it and think about price in the correct terms when it comes to e-commerce. The framework goes on like this: VAMD: value, architecture, margin, and discount. So first of all, pricing should be driven by perceived value, not cost. A strong branding, a clear positioning, and a strong emotional connection with your customer is what gives you permission to raise prices and ask for a premium price. And the price, so the value that customers give to your products, is also relative to your competitors, to the alternatives that customers have within the marketplace. So remember these concepts when starting out your own brand. So my strongest recommendations when drafting your pricing strategy of your brand would be to focus on what your brand is, where it is sitting amongst the competitors, and how you can differentiate and elevate, asking for a premium price. Let's now talk about architecture. Price architecture is how you structure and present prices to your customers to influence perception and to drive purchasing decisions. It includes things like psychological pricing, price anchoring, price tiers, and regional pricings. Basically is how you differentiate the pricing within your portfolio to better drive sales. This topic is very broad, and my strongest recommendation to keep it simple would be to communicate value clearly, create meaningful comparisons within the product's prices in your product architecture, and make sure that your pricing is relevant and differentiated in each market based on the purchase power of every country. So make sure to search the competition and ask for a higher price in those countries with a higher purchasing power. Let's move on to margin, which is probably the most important thing that you need to understand about pricing, because the objective is not to maximize the full price of a product, it's to maximize the gross margin. The gross margin is the revenue minus the COGS, the cost of goods sold. And yes, revenue may look impressive, but is actually margin that determines whether the revenue is actually creating value for your business. So the first step here is to understand and track the gross margin split by the different product types. Because yes, each product might have a very different gross margin. And hear me out, a product mix consisted by 80% of products with a very low margin, I don't know, a 0.1% gross margin. This is one of the biggest threats that e-commerce face. So my recommendation is to optimize your pricing strategy so that the products with the highest margin are also those that are the high sellers. Let's now talk about discount, the last element of this VAMD framework that we are going through to discuss and conceive pricing for e-commerce. Everybody knows that there are markdowns and that there are discounts, but what's the difference between them? So a markdown is a price reduction that remains in place throughout the sales period, and it's usually fixed. A discount, on the other hand, is temporary and usually conditional. For example, subscribing to a newsletter or buying multiple items or unlocking a promotional offer. This distinction matters a lot because in many e-commerce categories, a significant share of sales is done during promotional periods like the summer sales, the winter sales, or most of them during the Black Friday. Customers are highly price sensitive and strongly driven by price in their purchase. So markdown and promotions must be planned well in advance when it comes to pricing strategy. So first of all, my biggest recommendations is to define your markdown strategies. Which are the products that we are going to be discounting for this sales period, for example? How many products will be discounted 30%? How many products will be discounted 40%? And so on. And then on top of your markdown strategies, you can plan bundles or other promotional activities like buy one, get 30% off, buy two, get 40% off, or extra discounts. So buy one, get 30, buy two, get extra 10% or 15% off. These bundles are powerful levers to increase average order values and UPT of your customers. But they're not only beneficial in increasing your sales, they also affect your P&L. So for example, if your gross margin, the example that we were making before, is already quite tight, well, you may not have room for another 20% extra discount. So when defining your pricing strategy, you should really consider all the four elements discussed in this video: the value, the architecture, the margin, and the discount. For example, let's suppose that you expect to sell 70% of the inventory of a specific product during the sales period at a price of 60 euro, where you still generate an 80% gross margin. What you could do in this case is that you could set the full price at 100 euros and apply a 40% markdown during sales. Because you know very well that even by applying that 40% markdown, your gross margin is still going to be 80%. And even if you sell that product at a lower volume during full price period, well, the higher margin generated at full price can help compensate for lower off-season volumes. At the same time, value and architecture determines how that product is positioned within your product assortment. So bear in mind, the key metric here is profitability, not gross revenue. And the goal is to grow demand without eroding the economics of the business. Okay, let's now move on to the third one of the 4 P's of the marketing mix: placement. Placement in your e-commerce is your infrastructure, your website or your app where customers discover your products and can complete their purchases. It is usually represented by your own infrastructures, your own website, but it can also expand to other marketplaces or social commerce platforms. In this video, we will focus on owned channels, owned websites, or e-commerce apps or PWAs. So the first principle is simple: design your website mobile first. In fact, in 2026, the majority of traffic comes from mobile. Users are navigating on e-commerces using their phones, not their desktops. So the experience and the navigation should be optimized for mobile usage since the very beginning and not adapted later. Another aspect that is very underestimated is language, which matters a lot. So especially if you're selling to multiple countries with different languages, providing the regional language spoke in that country can boost your sales a lot, especially in the markets where English adoption is low. And finally, it goes without saying that your website should be tested continuously to identify bugs, remove friction, and catch implementation errors. And that is especially true for the lower funnel, where even a small issue near checkout can have a direct impact on conversion. Conceptually, in fact, I divide the website, the placement of your e-commerce, into 2 areas: the upper funnel and the lower funnel. So the upper funnel is the placement, the place where they navigate since the moment they land on your website up to the moment where they begin checkout. And that is regardless of where they land, whether they land the homepage, whether they land in the PDP or the PLP. It usually consists of 4 elements: the homepage, the PDP, the PLP, and then customers, of course, interact with the architecture of your website, so also your menu and many other features and elements. The priorities to me here are three: speed of navigation, intuitive navigation, and strong product discovery. The last one is paramount. The website architecture and everything inside your website, so categories, menus, filters, and search, must help customers to find what they're looking for and to do it quickly. So if someone searches black lamp in the internal search, the algorithm should recognize the intent and return the relevant results. And this is also where cross-selling and upselling comes into play. Recommendation tools and algorithm can use the browsing history and browsing behavior of your users to surface relevant products that customers looked for in previous searches. And they can do that in the right moments. So for example, at the checkout or after adding a product to the cart. And cross-selling in e-commerce is extremely relevant because from a commercial point of view, it can increase your cart size and higher UPT, while make the discovering and the navigation of your users more personalized. Let's now say a few words about the lower funnel, which is that section of the website that begins when customers enter the checkout process and finishes when hopefully they complete the purchase. The objective is simple: to maximize what I call the checkout conversion, so to minimize the frictions in the 4 steps of the checkout. So for example, removing the bugs that there might be in the shipping section of the checkout, while at the same time offering customers the payment and shipping options that best match their needs. Many of the most important levers that you can pull in this part of placement, so the checkout funnel, the lower funnel, are actually operational rather than purely technical and related to developers' works. Don't get me wrong, UI, UX designers and developers are extremely relevant in optimizing the conversions rate of an e-commerce. But let me make an example: payment methods. Payment methods for online payments strongly differ from country to country. So for example, Spain has Bizum, Poland has Blik, which is one of the most common payment methods used in the country and strongly adopted by its population. And then you have more global payment methods such as PayPal or buy now and pay later options such as Klarna or Scalapay that are also very common in e-commerce. What I mean is that payment methods should be kept up to date, and a big chunk of time and resources should be allocated to optimize this section of the checkout. And shipping options matter just as much, because home delivery is just one of the options that today the market can offer. Express shipping, pickup points, PUDO, these are all options that customers really like to use whenever purchasing online. And offering and providing a certain shipping option or not might be the reason why a customer decides to purchase from your website or from your competitors. But whenever it comes to shipping, you also have speed and reliability of the courier, which are all options that influence whether a customer decides whether to purchase or not. Another very operational element that might come into play in the last part of the funnel is the omni-channel. This is valid for brands. This is especially true for brands that also have a physical presence. So they have physical stores. Services such as Boppis and Boris, so buy online, pick up in store, or buy online and returning stores, they improve convenience. They connect online and offline, and they bring customers into stores, maximizing the customer experience and potentially increase sales in the physical point of sales. Well, all of this falls into the bucket of placements when it comes to e-commerce. Making products easy to discover, easy to search, easy to buy, and easy to receive at home at your most convenient location. And let's now discuss the last one of the 4 P's of the marketing mix when it comes to e-commerce: promotion. Promotion conceptually is the mix of strategies that you can use to generate awareness, attract customers to your e-commerce, and ultimately drive sales of your business. It all starts with your channel mix. In fact, no brand can rely on organic or direct traffic alone. Paid channels like Google can represent, in fact, a significant share of the total traffic and of the total revenues. So every current and potential channel should be taken into considerations when drafting your channel mix strategy and your promotion strategy, which of course should have a dedicated marketing investment. This is what promotion means to me when it comes to e-commerce. And to better explain, understand it, and conceive it, I have created the simple framework, the ARP framework, awareness, retention, and performance, that I'm going to discuss just now in this video. So ARP, awareness, retention, and performance. Let's start with the first one, awareness. So awareness channels introduce your brands to very broad and generic audiences. And these channels include organic social media, but also influencer and creator partnerships, sponsorship, PR, and content marketing. Conversion rates of these channels are usually lower because the primary objective of this bucket is visibility, reach, brand consideration, rather than direct conversion. This part in e-commerce is usually the most underestimated, and marketers tend to underspend in awareness and overspend in performance campaigns, for example. So don't make this mistake. You have to grow your name, you have to grow your brand towards generic audience before you can find targeted and very high intent customers using different strategies like performance campaigns, as we will see later on. But now let's talk about the second element of the ARP framework, retention. Retention strategies focuses on people who already know your brand. So for example, existing customers, previous visitors of your website, or users in your proprietary database. So for example, those who subscribe to your newsletter. It includes different strategies like email marketing, SMS, abandoned cart flows, retargeting, personalized communications in general, like push notifications. But in this bucket, I like to include also broader promotional levers like loyalty programs, which are usually in the form of earn and burn schemes, as well as other things like customers' reviews and word of mouth. And I know what you're gonna say, these are not channels in the strict sense, but they build trust, they encourage repeat purchases, they turn customers into loyal customers, and in general, turn existing customers into advocates of the brand. And they're definitely extremely useful to strengthen customer retention whenever it comes to e-commerce. And to be honest, it would be no surprise to me if you would discover that the channels that your most loyal customers are using to interact with your brand are organic and direct. This would be, in fact, the clearest signal of strong customer relationship and strong emotional bond. Okay, let's talk about the last one of the ARP framework, the performance. The scope of performance channels is to target audiences with a higher and more measurable purchase intent. This includes a variety of channels like paid search, paid social, affiliates, referral, but also SEO. Everything that helps to position your brand in front of people that are actively searching for relevant products or information. In here, each channel follows a different logic and must be evaluated using different metrics and different tactics. Paid search, paid advertising, for example, is measured using CPC and a KPI called ROAS, which is the return on ad spend. The rule of thumb is very simple. The higher the ROAS, the more efficient the campaign is in generating revenue. But then if you take a different channel like affiliation, for example, well, it works on a completely different logic. In this model, the affiliates, so basically the partners, which are, for example, influencers or content creators, they promote a brand's product through attract links and earn a commission whether customers, their audience, basically, click on the link and buy something using that link. They earn whenever their referral generates a sale or they do another agreed action with the advertiser. What I would like you to take home whenever it comes to performance is that no single channels works in the same way and no single channels works for every business. And since performance channels can contribute up to 60% of the channel mix of an e-commerce, well, the right mix depends entirely on your products, on your price, on your promotion, on your placement, but also on other features like your brand maturity, your audience, and your objectives. Unfortunately, today I cannot cover all the topics of promotion, but let me know what you're interested in and I will make a dedicated video. But what you can do today is to leverage on the ARP framework to decide whether your priority is to build awareness, to retain your customers, or to maximize the performance. And remember, your channels do not appear in your channel mix automatically and magically. Each channel requires a specific set of skills, dedicated resources, and a dedicated budget. A budget that usually is spent for advertising, but also AI tools, platforms, agencies, and professional support. Okay, so we've talked about the marketing mix, the 4 Ps of marketing applied to e-commerce. If there is one thing that I would like you to take away from this video is that this is not just one decision. It's 4 different decisions: product, price, placement, and promotion. And they're not isolated. They are together. Whenever it comes to product, start with customer demand. Then give every item a clear role using the e-commerce BCG matrix that I've shown in this video: hero product, cash cow, outlet, or carryover. Then price. Use the VAMD framework: value, architecture, margin, and discount to grow demand without sacrificing profitability. Then cover the placement part. Build a mobile-first experience, strengthen discovery in the upper funnel, and remove every possible friction from checkout in the lower funnel. At last, promotion. Use the ARP framework: awareness, retention, and performance to create a channel mix that attracts new customers, builds loyalty, and captures demand. Again, these 4 Ps do not operate independently. The strongest e-commerce strategies align the 4 Ps: product, price, placement, and promotion into one coherent system. So I hope you like these videos. If you like this content, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Bye.